It's the Green Bay Packers. I mean, this is like the Mecca of the football world.
Herzlich willkommen zum Packers Talk Germany, dem offiziellen Podcast der Packers Germany.
And a sack for Sean Gary. And it's tipped by Alexander. Romeo down at the pylon. And taking it to the end zone by Jaden Reed. Fires. Brings the grab. Watson. Love on third down to the end zone. What a catch. Touchdown.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen, liebe Packers-Fans, zu einer neuen Ausgabe des Packers Talk Germany, Folge 407. Heute mit einer etwas anderen Folge, denn wir sprechen nicht in unserer gewohnten Muttersprache, sondern wechseln ins Englische und das hat einen bestimmten Grund, denn wir haben einen Special Guest aus Wisconsin im Podcast. Doch bevor ich ihn gleich vorstelle oder er sich vielmehr selbst vorstellt, bin ich, wie gesagt, nicht alleine. Ich habe ja wir gesagt. Und zwar habe ich mir tatkräftige Unterstützung vom lieben Tobi geholt. Tobi, hi.
Moin Marc, hi, danke. Und ja, ich bin super gehypt auf die Folge.
Perfekt. Okay, then we switch to the English language. Wir wechseln mal ins Englische, liebe Freunde. We give a warm welcome to our special guest today from the Packer Day podcast, Andy Herman. Hi, Andy. How are you?
Fellas, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it a ton.
Yeah, we're really excited that you are on our podcast. Like I said in our previous speech and over the mail, very appreciated that you make the time for us. So let's dive into our first question. Tobi, please.
Yeah, Andy, for listeners who might not know you yet, maybe some know you yet, what do you do exactly and since when? Please tell us something about you, your show, and yourself.
Yeah, so I cover the Packers full time as part of the Pack-A-Day podcast, and it is a 365-day a year Packers-centric podcast where we talk all things Packers every single day. Usually we have my own episode, which we do on the audio side as well as on the YouTube channel. And then we have a whole team of people who puts out an additional episode every single day as well, which is really awesome. And then, I've been covering the team in some capacity for a while now. I kind of did it as a labor of love. I've did it for fun. And then it kind of catapulted into something way more than that, where now I do it full time. I've been doing it full time for a few years now. Am credentialed so I can be at the practices and in the press box and things like that for the games. And it's something that started as just, hey, I would love to talk Packers on a podcast, and it's catapulted into something totally different, which has been really amazing as well. So could not have asked for anything different or better. And it's just a huge joy to get to do every single day. It's a lot of work, but that's kind of my backstory.
Yeah, as you mentioned, you create content literally every day and every day of the year. And how do you organize that workflow? I mean, is it not sometimes like exhausting or stuff like that? I mean, we are doing like in 2 shows in a week when it's season, but when it's off season, like we have a little like a break and stuff like that. How difficult is it to deliver Packers content to your audience, literally every day?
Yeah, so I think there can be a misconception of, I just can get in front of the microphone and talk Packers, and it's just this easy thing that you get to do. And it's fun, it's enjoyable. I love doing it, but there is a lot of work that goes into it, especially with the content that we provide. I think, for example, I could probably do a piece of content today for 20 minutes. That would be probably pretty easy to prep, and I could probably do it without much advanced warm up or anything like that, or notes or anything, and just kind of go off the cuff. I could go live right now and do an episode and just do a Q&A, and it would be pretty easy to do. But a lot of the stuff that we go into is like today's show, for example, was a deep dive on Benjamin St-Juste and me grading every single play of his from 2025 and kind of my key takeaways and how he kind of compared to the other corners on the team. And in order to do that, obviously you have to go through and grade every play and watch every play on all 22, but it just takes a lot of prep time, and it takes a lot of, watching the actual film so you can discuss it educatedly. Same thing when we do our deep dives on the rookie prospects or, any of the topics that come up. So it's like I said, it's fun, it's enjoyable, it's a labor of love. I wouldn't want to be doing anything different, but there is a lot of work that goes into it. And especially you can imagine too, and in season, when you've got a game that just happened and a game coming up the following weekend, there's a lot to talk about. The content can come to you. In training camp, there's a lot to talk about. The content comes to you. You don't have to do a lot of extra, preparation and things like that. There's just a ton to talk about. But in the off season, I think to me, that's where sort of the special sauce is made. And when the people who really put in the extra time, effort, and energy to find ways to talk about things that, people are still excited to think about and talk about, but, maybe it wasn't top of mind, or maybe again, you have to put in a little bit more research into it. To me, I think that's where it gets really, really fun. But yeah, it takes a lot. It is 365 days a year, and we're putting out new content every single day. And so there does definitely come a level of work with that. And the nice thing is we've been doing this for so long now that, I wouldn't say it's, I wouldn't say there's like necessarily a script for what we do day in and day out. But I will say, if you're lacking for content ideas or things like that, you can go back and look like, all right, what did I talk about a year ago at this time? What were some of my topics during that? And so you kind of have a little bit of a content plan of, during each month, the sort of things that you're talking about during that season. And then again, of course, things can change based on what actually happens if a coach gets fired or a player gets cut or traded for or signed or things like that. But overall, I think, we've gotten to a pretty good rhythm with exactly the type of content that we put out every day throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, quite nice. I saw today was the 2856th episode, right?
Yeah, so it's actually, the 2856 is how we sort of label it, because we only do technically kind of one, episode per day. So it's 2856 days of the podcast, but within those 2856 days, I think we actually have 4,512 episodes now. So if you actually go out and look at our entire library, there's 4,512. Now, I think I've been doing lately, every once in a while, as kind of like a bonus episode, I will do some like Pack-A-Day classics. So like a Pack-A-Day episode from a really long time ago, or like when, Rodgers was traded, or when Love was drafted, or things like that. So I think a handful of those might be, kind of duplicates or repeats, but in totality, about 4,512 total episodes up on the feed.
Yeah, nice. How is the European fan base, especially the German Packers fan base, perceived in Green Bay?
Yeah, really well. And I think, anytime, there's a talk of like, international fans, it always feels like there is a huge fan base of Packers fans. So, we like to label the Packers as America's team, but it definitely feels a lot more global and worldwide. When Green Bay played the Jets overseas, there was a ton of, Packers fans in that stadium. And then again, same thing in Brazil against Philly. There was a ton of Packers fans in that stadium. So it is a fan base that obviously travels really well, but it is not just local here in Wisconsin. It's not just nationwide. It is definitely more of a worldwide phenomenon. So no, very, very well. And I think, as sometimes Packers fans can be a little bit maybe disappointed that the team has to travel internationally, just because sometimes, well, first of all, they haven't done well with it. They lost both of their games recently, but it kind of seems like sometimes there can be an effect afterwards. I do think, the fans internationally are viewed very, very positively, and again, show up everywhere that the Packers go, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, I remember that game. I was there in the stadium, so it was not the best showing of the Packers. They started good, but then they, we talk about later, blew it again.
It was the Giants.
It was the Giants, yeah, and Saquon Barkley.
The Jets the week after, and then lost to the Jets, and I was
they lost
those two games transposed. But yeah, you're right. It is the Giants.
It was. It started very good. Then, in the end, they lost. Yeah, Saquon Barkley again, and I think Daniel Jones. Both of them. And Bellinger, the tight end, he was really good at that game. But we don't talk about the Giants, we talk about the Packers. Let's reflect a little bit and go back to the 2025 season, and starting with the biggest news last offseason, the Micah Parsons trade. The Packers haven't done that kind of splash move like years from now. So I know you have like a funny but also crazy story about the whole trade part. I know you were like going to a concert, right? It was something like that.
Yeah, so I was going to an Oasis concert in Chicago on that day, and I almost tweeted out before I left. I almost tweeted and said, "Hey, you can watch for a Micah Parsons trade today because I'm going to be out of town, and so of course it'll go down today if it's going to happen." And then I'm like, nobody cares. That's too much about me. It doesn't revolve around me. So I didn't tweet it, and then. So it's about 4 hours from my house to Chicago, almost exactly. And the moment that I got basically right into Chicago, about the furthest point that I could have been from home for that specific trip, is when I see the tweet that the Packers have traded for Micah Parsons, and so. I'm literally on my off ramp after battling, Chicago traffic almost in rush hour to go to this concert. And I'm pretty excited to go and have friends that are already there waiting and, getting some drinks and things like that. I get off the off ramp to my exit and then immediately do a U-turn back on the highway, back in the thick of rush hour Chicago traffic, to then come back home immediately and 4 hours later to immediately go live and record the show breaking down the Micah Parsons trade. Thankfully, I was worried that by the time, 4 hours had passed, that it was already going to be like, all right, people are already, done and over with, not over with it, but like, all of this stuff is going to be covered already. No, fans were still freaking out. We had thousands of people in the live chat. It was a ton of fun. Justice Mosqueda hopped on and ended up talking for over 4 hours on the live show about the Micah pickup and just how incredible it was. So yeah, it was a crazy scenario. Sometimes that comes with a gig. I know a lot of people are just like, well, just come back and, record after the show is done. Everything would have been the next morning by that point, and it just would not have been the same. So that was one of the sacrifices I had to make to skip the concert and come home. And I wouldn't have rather done it any other way. That was such a fun night, just breaking it all down. And, bummer I missed the concert, but definitely worth it to have that moment.
But you had a listener or listeners all over the world. I was listening to it because I had to work late, and I heard over our Discord channel that Micah Parsons got traded to us, and I needed immediately input, and it provided me input. So thank you for that. And what Justice Mosqueda did and hopped on the show, it was very amazing.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. The last season, 2025, was for me like a roller coaster ride. But at the end, it felt from the outside like the Packers were a bit lacking of finishing mentality through the season, especially maybe late in close games. At the same time, it seemed like both the staff and the team had more potential than the way we were able to show on the field. Do you have any ideas what might have caused that?
Yeah, I think it's a variety of things, but it definitely didn't ever quite feel like things clicked into place. It did the first couple weeks, Detroit and Washington. It felt really good. It felt like they were on the right track immediately. And then it just felt like they could never quite recapture that. And to your point, a lot of it was closing games. There was also just kind of like disappointing games where you had the Browns game, which was a loss, the Panthers game, which was a loss. Even that Giants game where they won, you needed like kind of like a miracle fourth down catch from Savion Williams in order to keep that drive alive and win that game. And it just felt like they had to work. And I get it, each week is its own unique challenge, and that you have to prepare for it like it's a big game no matter what. But everything just felt a degree of challenging that it didn't quite feel like it should have been. I think a couple things, again, just closing mentality and keeping the foot on the gas, I think was an issue for them all year. I think the offensive line play was really something that caused a lot of problems because I think they had a lot of great play calls, and I think they have the right playmakers and Jordan Love, and I think and Josh Jacobs, etc. I think they had all of that, but when your offensive line is letting you down, a couple things happen. I mean, it's really tough to close games when you can't run the football, when you have to consistently throw to pick up first downs, and then you have more opportunities to stop the clock. And it just makes it really difficult. You can't, bleed out the clock the way that you want. And so that makes things challenging. It also gets a lot harder in the red zone when you don't have the offensive line that you need. And so a lot of those really impressive drives that, looked good ended up in 3 points, or in last season's case, because of the way McManus was kicking, 0 points instead of what should have been touchdown drives. That I think caused a lot of games to be a lot closer than they should have been. And then I think, once, of course, Micah went out and you had the cumulative, Tucker being out, Wyatt being out, Zach Tom being out. They also just got to a point from a health standpoint that made it really, really difficult to play at a high enough level to ultimately get to where they wanted to go. So I think it was a variety of different things, but I think it starts in the trenches. I think, guys like Rashawn Gary and some of the interior just didn't have the seasons that you really needed them to have. Green Bay's obviously changed over a lot of that on the defensive side. On the offensive side, there hasn't been a lot of changeover in the trenches, just new people in new spots. Jordan Morgan's going to go to left tackle. Belton will get every opportunity to be the full-time right guard. Sean Ryan's going to solidify that center spot. So you have a little bit more clarity there, but those guys are going to have to step up. And I think that's where it starts is, can you be better in the trenches? If so, a lot of those, field goal opportunity drives are going to turn into touchdown drives, and you're going to be able to bleed out the clock fast or better. Same thing on 3rd and 4th and short, another area where Green Bay really struggled, which you sort of need, again, to close out games or to get the point production that you want. Again, offensive line struggled. And so they weren't picking up those 3rd and 4th short opportunities that they needed to pick up, again, to close out games and to pick up wins. So those are the areas where they have to be better. And I think if they can, you can see a much better Packers team. But if it's the same as it was last year, I think they're going to go through a lot of the same struggles, and we could see a very similar sort of season as we did a year ago.
What we not talked about yet is like the team cards which came out. There was something like Matt LaFleur admitted in front of the media that there was like some, not disturbance, but some players were not satisfied with their role or with stuff like that. And as you said, like all the injuries, and sometimes even every inch was like hard fought. When you look at all of that, and also this team cards, these reports with Adam Stanovich not grading out so well, was it for you to extend the contract for Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst and Russ Ball, or do you have another opinion?
Yeah, it's I don't think there's a perfect answer to this one, because I think a lot of it's going to be the benefit of hindsight once we see these next couple seasons to see how they respond to everything. I do in general think that this, sort of powers that be of Brian Gutekunst, Russ Ball, Matt LaFleur have earned the right to kind of work through what was really kind of their first, I guess, second season of adversity. That last year of Aaron Rodgers, in the year that they played internationally, went really awry. And they bounced back really well, and they transitioned to Jordan, and they immediately went to the playoffs, and they won a playoff game, and things were trending in the right direction. I think this is their first real kind of adversity since that. And they responded great the last time they had adversity, and the team played a lot better, and they transitioned to Jordan really well. But now you have kind of a different adversity where, like you mentioned, there's the report cards. It didn't seem like the team camaraderie was always great. Matt LaFleur specifically said that, players were unhappy with their roles, and he thinks it affected the way that they played at the end of the year. That's definitely a red flag. And you also have the adversity of just feeling stagnant, like things are, you're just running in place. You're the 7th seed, you're losing in the first round, or I guess a couple of years ago in the second round, and you're just not making any progress. So I think the onus is really on this coaching staff to take that step and say, hey, we are better than that, and we're going to prove it to everybody. But I do think that they deserve the opportunity to go out and prove that they could do that. Now, this could go in a variety of different directions. And if they go out and have an amazing season, and certainly if they would win a Super Bowl, it's going to look like a genius move that they brought everybody back and everything looks great. If they show progress, maybe they get to the NFC Championship game, win a couple playoff games, things look good. Maybe the ball doesn't bounce their way in the NFC Championship game, they lose. But I think it'll at least be viewed as like there were signs of legitimate progress, that they're green and growing and going in the right direction. If it's another 7th seed in a playoff exit, it's going to feel very stagnant of like, here we go again, another 7th seed in a first round exit. They're 7th seed merchants. They can't get past that. And there's going to be another level of pressure that comes in 2027 with that. And if it's worse, if they don't make the playoffs, or for some reason, if they all of a sudden have a 5-12 season, unless there's like a catastrophic Jordan Love injury that explains that, that's going to be really difficult. And that extension is going to look, I think, very poor in hindsight. So I think this season is going to go a long way in defining whether or not Ed Policy was right in making that move. But I do appreciate the fact that, again, I think they deserve that opportunity to show and kind of overcome what was a down season. I think the other thing that we take for granted too is a down season in Green Bay is a 7th seed in a playoff appearance. Like that's a crazy aspect, right? Down seasons for most teams are you're picking in the top 5 of the draft, or like you might go 5 to 10 years without even seeing the playoffs, some of these teams. So it is crazy the bar that is set where a playoff entrance and a first round exit is a disappointment. And I get it. I truly do. When again, things feel a little bit stagnant, but I think it would have been a little bit rash to go in a different direction and rebuild this thing. Now, that being said, I do think there are moves they could have been more aggressive with. Luke Butkus on the offensive line coach, I think, if they would have gone in a different direction, I think it would have been understandable. I think they should have been more aggressive trying to find a special teams coach rather than Rich Bisaccia being the one that said, yep, I'm going to Clemson. But I think overall the direction was right, and now they just have to prove that it was in fact the right decision.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. For me, it's like this 5-game, or for everyone, I think this 5-game losing streak at the end of the season stuck in your brain. That's what people remember at last. And this loss to the Bears was, quite hurtful and for everyone. So everyone, you get measured, I think, with the last thing you do. So it's kind of frustrating for everyone. So they took like the scapegoat, or they're looking for the scapegoat. In that case, it was Matt LaFleur at the first point. So because they choked so many games at the end, If you had to summarize the Packers 2025 season in one headline, what would it be and why?
That's a great question. One headline. I would say like same issues plague Packers in another, 7th seed first round exit, something like that. Because I think special teams being abysmal, at least in key moments, was again another key factor. I think not being able to close out games. I think some of the 3rd and 4th and short issues that have plagued the Packers in the past reared their ugly head again. And some key negative plays in key moments, as well as injuries being a factor again. I think it was sort of the same formula that we've seen that have derailed the Packers in the past. So again, I think it was a very similar theme, which is again, I think why a lot of people were frustrated of just like, I've seen this movie before and I know how it ends, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I think almost to an extent, I saw people tweet it at the time. I'm like, when the Packers were up, what was it, 21-3 at halftime in the Bears game? It was like, nobody was comfortable. Nobody was like, all right, Packers got this one. This is great. It was like, all right, how is this going to find a way to, be close in the end? And not only was it close in the end, it was another, collapsed loss at the hands of your bitter rivals in their stadium. And you really, grasped defeat in the jaws of victory. You had that game, and it just is a real, kick in the nuts, for lack of a better term, when you have a season end like that. So, I think it was just a very similar sort of, outcome and just kind of process that unfortunately we've seen in the past.
Okay, then let's move on to the future and to the next season. Tobi, please, the off season 2026.
Yeah, we've done so much moves in free agency. We are trade in draft. We cut some players. Which move in free agency or via trade did you like the most, and which one raised the biggest question mark for you?
Yeah, I'll start with the latter. The biggest question mark to me is the Zaire Franklin trade. And to be fair, I haven't gone through and graded every snap of every play for him yet, which should come next week. And I'm really excited to do that. But when I went back and watched the tape when they signed him, I wasn't extremely enthusiastic about, kind of some of the stuff that I saw on tape. And while I don't think Colby Wooden was like this, great starter or anything like that, I did think he proved to be a pretty solid rotational defensive lineman for a group that didn't have a lot of pretty solid rotational defensive linemen. Now they pick up Hargrave, they get McClellan in the draft, and hopefully that, eases some of those concerns. But I'll just be honest, I would have feel a lot better right now if Wooden was one of those top 6, if it was still McClellan, Hargrave, Wyatt, and then Brooks, Brinson, and Wooden. I'd feel pretty good about that 6 of where it's at. Without Wooden, now you're looking at guys like, is it going to be a Nasir Stackhouse, or is it going to be Jonathan Ford or somebody like that takes that spot? And I think that is definitely a little bit of a downgrade. Meanwhile, I do think that free agency played out in a way at linebacker where, a player like a Devin Lloyd was out there, and it wasn't like a crazy contract that I thought he was going to get around like 20 million per year. I think there were some things that maybe they could have done to address that linebacker position a little bit differently, or even maybe attack it in the draft a little bit more, because I thought it was actually a pretty strong linebacker draft as well, rather than kind of making that swap. Now, I think that this season is going to hinge on not having Colby Wooden? No. And do I think Zaire Franklin can still be a really solid linebacker? Yes. But that was just one that I think I was a little bit more perplexed by as it kind of played out. As far as like favorite move, I really liked really the other, the sort of actually all of the free agent signings. So I think Hargrave made a ton of sense. And just even at that point in free agency, like they needed a defensive tackle, and you started canvassing the market, and there was just not anything left. And then Hargrave gets cut. He had the experience with Jonathan Gannon. It was sort of the worst kept secret that he would ultimately end up in Green Bay if he did get released. And so once he's released, he comes to Green Bay. I think that move made all the sense in the world, and he's going to really help, with that defensive line depth. I really like the St. Juice signing. The contract is fantastic, and it really gives you the, 1 year, $5 million this year, and then it gives you another $5 million option next year. And I think that's a really smart move to make as well. And he's coming off his best season playing with the Chargers a year ago. I actually, Sky Moore was one that I talked about ahead of time of like, I think Sky Moore would make a ton of sense as like your 5th or 6th wide receiver. They didn't need like a starting caliber guy. They needed a depth piece who could also be a kick returner and punt returner. And Sky Moore was like this beautiful fit where he is a true kick returner. He's a true punt returner. And like, he's a legitimate like 5th or 6th wide receiver for a team too. And that's exactly the piece that they needed. It made all the sense, and it certainly wasn't going to break the bank. And then it felt like they needed a veteran backup quarterback with Malik Willis leaving, somebody that, again, if Love is out for 4 to 6 weeks, you can go 2-2 or 3-3 to kind of keep the season afloat. And I think that's exactly what Tyrod Taylor would do if given that opportunity. And so I really liked all of those signings. I think they all made sense. I don't think any of them are going to change the DNA of the Packers in a sort of significant way, but I think all of them are going to really help this team this upcoming season.
So yeah, the Packers did also some coaches changes because Jeff Heffley left and some other coaches left with him to Miami. Your overall opinion? I mean, we could also talk about the leaving of Rich Bisaccia, but when we have to look a little bit on the time, so I make it a little bit short. Your 2 takes to Jonathan Gannon. Do you like the signing of Jonathan Gannon, and what can you say, or what do you say about Cam Akord?
Yeah, so both of them, I think the positive sign is that they've both coordinated a number 1 unit respectively. So Jonathan Gannon as defensive coordinator in Philly had the number 1 unit. Now after that, it kind of went down a little bit. And then Cam Akord had the number 1 special teams unit in New England. Now after that, again, it went down his next 3 seasons. But I do like the fact that he showed the ability to have both of them showed the ability to have a top end coordinated defense and special teams respectively. I think both of them came across well in their introductory press conferences. I think they both have the requisite experience that you're looking for. I do think that, there's been this profile of really good defensive coaches who have gone on to be head coaches, and their head coach tenure doesn't turn out, but they go on to be great long-term defensive coordinators. Steve Spagnuolo is somebody that comes to mind. Greg Williams had that sort of career. There's a variety of those type of coaches who have done really, really well, and I think getting that head coaching experience is really valuable as well. So I'm really excited about Gannon. I think he has the ability to coordinate a really great defense, but we're going to have to see it. We were excited at times about Pettin. I think we were less excited about Joe Barry, but we are excited about Halfley, and there was mixed results all throughout there. But I do think he has the ability to be a good coordinator. And then same thing with Acord. But as I've said in the past, I will trust special teams when I actually see it in practice. In the meantime, I trust nothing when it comes to special teams. But hey, hopefully Acord can be the one that finally gets the special teams turned around.
Yeah, I think we hope too. So let's talk about a bit to the NFL draft. The Packers didn't have a first round pick. So what your takes about the Packers draft approach and the players Guti picked? Are you happy about the picks? What's your favorite pick? Something like that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting way to sort of look at the Packers draft, because I think if you look at it in its totality and what they were able to get in this draft, and you kind of compare it to other teams, it's tough because they only had 6 picks and they don't have a first round pick. And so if you're looking at it and like comparing draft classes, Green Bay is going to be towards the bottom of like ultimate, what they took away from this draft just because of those circumstances. What I would say is I think this was a down draft year overall. And I think Green Bay, again, didn't have a first round pick and ended up with only 6 picks total. If you would say, hey, you only get 6 dart throws, don't have a first round pick, and it's a bad-ish draft, like, all right, I'm not, like, the expectation should be extremely low. And yet I think what Guti did with those 6 draft picks in a down draft, hitting positions of need, I do not think you could have asked for anything better with how he came out of this draft. I think with Brandon Cisse, I've talked about this, but I think there was a real drop off after that Cisse pick. There was a couple linebackers left, like a CJ Allen, that I think were still good. But unless you need an off-ball linebacker, I think Cisse was the last sort of really good player at a premium position that was on the board, and they were able to get him at that spot. And then I think, they were looking at McClellan in round 2. I think to get a well-rounded defensive tackle who can rush the passer a bit, stop the run a bit, can play any spot in the interior, another position of need, I think they did well to get McClellan. And then to get DDS in the 4th round, who's more of a high upside play, that is also a position of need at edge, that, again, I think a lot of Packers fans would have been happy with if they took in the 2nd or 3rd round. To get him in the 4th, I thought was great value. Jager Burton, they finally get on the board with an offensive player who I think is going to provide some really good depth along that offensive line. And I think he can be a starting center for them down the road if need be. And then, Damani Jackson is somebody who I think is going to contribute on special teams and add to that defensive back room. I think there's a potential that he could play outside at corner. I think he could play inside in slot. And I think even eventually he might end up at safety as well. And again, in the meantime, being a core special teams player. And then you get a potential long-term kicker in round 6. And now obviously after releasing McManus, it's going to be paramount that Trey Smack comes in and does a good job sooner rather than later. And trusting a rookie kicker is never an ideal situation. But I thought overall, Guti hit a lot of needs and brought in some really good depth and competition at some spots that needed it. I thought he navigated it as well as possibly could be, considering only 6 picks, no first round pick, and in a down draft. I could not have asked for anything better.
Yeah, that's for us the same. Last week the schedule was released. What are your thoughts overall on the matchups? For me, the Packers don't really have a traditional bye week throughout the Thanksgiving Eve game on Wednesday, but we have several mini bye weeks. Is this an advantage or a disadvantage? What do you think?
We'll have to see, but I think it's an advantage because I think, there's always that discussion of like rest versus rust. And I think it's always good to get rest, but I think sometimes almost like 2 weeks off and it's not full 2 weeks off, but you kind of get my point. It almost sometimes can feel like a little bit too much where you kind of get out of rhythm a little bit. They have 5 extended, sort of time off periods this season. They have 9 days off from September 25th to October 3rd, 9 days off from October 30th to November 7th, 9 days off. These are without games. Obviously, they practice within these, but 9 days off November 16th to November 24th, 10 days off from November 26th to December 5th, and then 8 days off from December 26th to January 3rd. So those are all extended periods of time where they're going to get time to rest their body, but also not be completely, kind of out of practice or, just a little bit of maybe some rust sneaking in there as well. I think getting all of those is going to provide, players time to really heal their body and get things right and not have to continue to press, every single day to rest and then just get one kind of period off. I think it's great to kind of break it up throughout the course of the season. Now, I know players are going to be upset. They maybe don't get as much time away on kind of an extended time off where they can go home and, really kind of get maybe some actual vacation time. But I think from an actual resting your body standpoint, I think this is really, really good. And I think it's going to really help them throughout the course of the season.
Yeah, from a roster standpoint, I go back what you told us about the draft and how you like the free agency and stuff like that. I think at some positions there are still some lackings or something like that. So they have some UDFAs. They brought some in. Maybe someone can sneak into the roster as well, or Guti trades for another player or at the roster cutdowns. But from a roster standpoint, what is your biggest concern for 2026, and what makes you optimistic on the other hand?
Yeah, so I think there's three. The first I would say is the offensive line. We kind of talked about it earlier, where it just didn't gel a season ago the way that it needed to. And you lost Elton Jenkins and Rasheed Walker, and everyone's mileage may vary as to how much that actually matters. But they didn't bring a ton in. Jager Burton is kind of the only real addition to that room. And so you lost two veteran players that have started a lot of games, and you added a 5th-round rookie. And so it's tough to look at that room and say, yep, that looks a lot better. But if you're looking for reasons for optimism, I do think Jordan Morgan is a better fit at left tackle. And I think him getting to practice there full time is going to be extremely beneficial. And Rasheed had a bad year last year. I would be willing to bet you that Jordan Morgan outplays the Rasheed Walker that we saw a season ago. Aaron Banks, when he was healthy last year, he actually played pretty well. When he was not healthy, he did not look good. If he can be healthy this year, I think you're going to get a guard that is a real legitimate, solid starting left guard in the NFL. And I think that would be an upgrade from what we saw from a more injury-riddled Aaron Banks a season ago. I think Sean Rhyan, I think if he gets a full year at center and gets to practice there consistently in camp and work at that specific spot, I think how is it not going to be better than what it was a year ago when he had to kind of get thrown into the position on the fly? Anthony Belton, not only is he in year 2 and hopefully taking a little bit of a year 2 jump, but his first time playing right guard, he didn't practice at right guard up until that week. He was at tackle his entire time in the offseason and during the season up until that point. He now gets to focus in on right guard. And of course, Zach Tom missed a bunch of time. And even when he was healthy, or when he was in there, he wasn't fully healthy and clearly not himself. And he's clearly the ace of that unit, and you really need him out there. So if healthy and those things come to fruition, I think there's still reasons to be optimistic, but they're going to have to show it. The other two ones a little bit quicker, just the pass rush without Micah. I think once Micah gets back, he cures a lot of ills in that situation, but you're asking LVN and some rotational edge rushers to do a lot of heavy lifting while Micah is out. And I'm not sure exactly how I feel about that. And then I still think, even though you go and get Benjamin St. Juste and Brandon Cisse and Damani Jackson and, try to fill some of those holes, I still think there's questions at corner of whether or not you have the top end talent that you need at that position to succeed. So those are my 3 questions. I think there's reasons to be optimistic with the new blood at all of those spots. And I think once Micah comes back, the edge rusher probably kind of fixes itself inherently. But those are my 3 kind of biggest questions going into the year.
Yeah, I think I'm totally with you. Like, for the edge rush, it's Micah Parsons who solidifies this on that line, and Zach Tom will solidify it for the offensive line a little bit. You have some key factors in that line. When they are healthy and they are back, I think you can have a very strong unit, of course, yes. So, Andy, before we get you out of here, we prepared some quick questions for you. So the first one is, the Green Bay Packers are for me. Your answer.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
The Green Bay Packers are for me? Question mark.
Sorry, could you kind of repeat the premise? Sorry, I missed the initial premise.
The Green Bay Packers, or what are the Green Bay Packers are meaning for you? Like that, what are they for you as a
Gotcha.
as a fan, as a person, as a podcaster? Yes.
Yeah, sorry, my apologies for
No
misunderstanding.
problem.
So yeah, I think for me, it is such an integral part of my life, obviously for a variety of reasons. I've made it, kind of my life's work and my full-time job, and what I do, and talking about it every single day. Obviously it's been a passion of mine since I was a kid. I love football right away. I love the Packers right away. I love the draft and free agency and everything that went along with it. And I've been nerding out about those things since I was just a little kid. And then above and beyond that, one of the cool things, about the podcast being 365 days a year is I have a lot of people that reach out to me and say that they're going through difficult times, or that they lost a family member, or that they had a fire at their house, or they're going through a medical issue, and there's just a lot on their minds. And the one thing that can kind of take them away for 20, 30, 40 minutes a day just to take their mind off of things is to throw on the Pack a Day podcast and to just listen to somebody talk about Packers and to take their mind off of things for a bit of time. And that means the world to me, that again, we can kind of be that distraction when needed, and that we can be that consistent force that's going to be there for anybody that wants to hear about the Packers every single day. And you can count on us for that. But also for me, in my personal walk, like, no matter what's going on around me, if there are, things that are not, going exactly the way that I would like them to, the Packers for me are kind of my constant too, where I can always talk Packers and there's always something to talk about, and it does kind of take your mind off of things. And so it's such a huge aspect again of my life, and it's been something that I've thankfully been able to parlay into what I get to do for my life's work. And I wouldn't have it any other way. And if you would have told 11-year-old me that this is what I got to do on a day-to-day basis, I think I would have been doing backflips. So it's been really, really cool.
When you think a game in Lambeau Field, early in the season by warm, or a snow game?
Somewhere in the middle. So I think first of all, there's never a bad time to be at Lambeau Field, whether it's for a family night, whether it's for a concert, a soccer game, whether you are doing the Lambeau Field tour. It is just a special place. But going for a Packers game, a regular season or playoff game, and walking through that tunnel and coming out in Lambeau Field and seeing everything in its glory, there is nothing quite like it. But as far as like a weather standpoint, if you can get some of those like mid to late October, early November games, and you can get some like 40 to 50 degree weather in Fahrenheit, some 40 to 50 degree Fahrenheit weather. And it is, it just has there's a crisp, cool wind in the air, but you still get that, sort of the sun coming down, and you're feeling kind of warmed up by that. You've got, maybe jeans and a light jacket on. And then you're just going through the parking lot, and all the smell of bratwurst and beer and everything, and all the tailgating that's going on. Those are the dream days. Some of the cold days, they're fun, but they get really freaking cold. And some of the warm days, they're fun, but like you sitting in that bowl with the sun beating down on you and it's like 80 degrees out, some of those feel pretty freaking intense and warm. So those fall games that feel like a true crisp fall Lambeau day, noon or 3 p.m. kickoff. And again, the just the smell of all the tailgating is permeating through the entire area. Those are what dreams are made of.
Yeah, and if you could pick one player from the NFL right now, who would you choose for the Green Bay Packers?
If I could take somebody from another team and put them on Green Bay?
Yes, exactly. Money don't care.
All right, what are your answers first? I want to hear, who would you guys take?
Myles Garrett?
That was my initial thought too.
Yeah, probably a second dominant pass rusher, because we see what the Texans are doing right now with Will Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter, and it's so much fun when they are on the field. Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons would be just crazy.
Yeah, I think you got one?
Yeah, my answer were Justin Jefferson.
That'd be a good one too. That'd be a really fun one too. Yeah, I think I will go with either Myles Garrett, or you mentioned Will Anderson too. I think either of those would be freaky opposite Micah. I don't know what you would do as an opposing offense in those scenarios. So I will go with either of those two, but Justin Jefferson would be a ton of fun on offense. If he was in his prime, Trent Williams would be a ton of fun to add to this team, but he's just a little bit outside of his prime, so I can't quite get there. And I don't know if there's another offensive lineman I feel quite as like amazing about, where they're just like so much head and tails above everybody else. So yeah, I think Myles Garrett, Will Anderson, or either of those two would be a ton of fun.
Yeah, so you know we are Packers Germany. Have you ever been to Germany, and do you know any German words?
Does bratwurst and beer count as German words?
Absolutely.
My German is my all of my international languages are not good. I spent time in high school and college playing Madden and doing fantasy football, and I didn't study at all. So that's what it ultimately gives me. It parlayed well into this, but it didn't parlay well to knowing other languages. I'll say that much. And then what was the first part of the question?
Have you ever been to Germany?
I've not been to Germany. If the Packers had played in Berlin this year, I would have been there. I would have gone for Packers Lions had it ended up being that. Unfortunately, it didn't. Of course, I would have also gone to the Paris game if it ended up being in Paris. Of course, it did not. I'm assuming we're going to get an international game next year. We'll see where it is. If it's in Europe, I'm like 99.9% sure I'll go. If it's like Brazil or Mexico City or Australia or somewhere like that, I'm not sure that I will. But either way, I'm going to try to get to an international game. And certainly the next one in Europe, I want to go to a billion% for sure. So if there is a Packers game in Germany next year or sometime in the near future, I hope to get there for sure.
Yeah, just write an email or contact us so we can meet up. We will be for sure there at the game.
Absolutely.
So we all are waiting for the Packers. That they come to Germany. We would be very, very excited. Yes. Andy, that was our podcast with you. Thank you so much for taking the time again. It was, so much fun picking your brain a little bit and listen to your wise words to the Packers. And yes, traditionally we close our podcast that our guest will have the final words. So me and Tobi will say goodbye at first to our listeners, and after that it's your stage, my friend, and you can advertise yourself a little bit for your channel and stuff like that. Okay, ich sag mal eben kurz von meiner Seite aus Tschüss. Es hat mir super viel Spaß gemacht. Ich hoffe, euch auch. In diesem Sinne, go Pack, go und Tobi.
Ja, für mich war es auch eine super neue Erfahrung, jemanden wie Andy hier zu Gast zu haben mit seiner Expertise live aus Wisconsin. Es hat super viel Spaß gemacht. Ich hoffe, wir können das irgendwann später nochmal wiederholen. Von meiner Seite auch aus danke. Thank you, Andy. Und ich bin damit auch raus mit dem Go Pack Go and give you the last words, Andy.
Yeah, fellas, thanks so much for having me. This was a ton of fun. Thanks for all the amazing Packers fans worldwide, which makes this, again, super cool. I've been on some international podcasts in the past, and I always enjoy doing it. And you guys are obviously a ton of fun as well. So thanks again for having me. And of course, as I end every show, until next time, and as always, go Pack, go.